back again, and it's 1982. It was a magical year, not just for the arcades, but for what was happening at home. The glow of the arcades was still there, the air thick with bleeps, buzzers and flashing lights, but suddenly, something new had happened in our living rooms. For me, it was the humble Specky. That little rubber-keyed marvel changed my life. It was the year gaming split into two worlds, the thrill of the arcades and the imagination of the home computers. You could still lose yourself in the hum of cabinet like Zaxxon and Dig Dug, but now you could also sit cross-legged on the carpet, waiting patiently for that cassette to load. Here's a reminder. Dreaming of jetpacks and skiing as a blob. In this episode, I'm counting down again my personal top 5 of 1982, a year where gaming truly came home, but the arcades were still king. So grab another coin, rewind that tape, and let's deep dive into a year that defined my life and what gaming would become. And at number 5, we have the Spectrum's first oddball hero. It was, of course, Horace Goes Skiing. In 1982, British bedrooms were glowing with the soft hum of ZX Spectrums and Commodore 64s. Arcade machines still ruled the high streets, but at home a new kind of hero was born, one made of chunky pixels and daft charm. Horace Goes Skiing was a perfect example of that new spirit. Published by Sinclair Research and developed by William Tang, it starred a curious blue blob with legs and a scarf. Not quite a man, not quite a monster, but instantly likeable. The setup was delightfully absurd. First you had to guide Horace across a busy road to rent some skis, a cheeky nod to Frogger. Then, once you survived the traffic, you hit the slopes for a wobbly downhill run full of trees, flags and comedic crashes. It was equal parts arcade challenge and British slapstick. What made it stand out wasn't just the gameplay, but its personality. Those bleeps and squeals, that tiny crash sound when you hit a tree, they gave the game character. It wasn't about high-tech graphics, it was about imagination. For kids in 1982, Horace Goes Skiing was the kind of game you'd show your mates just to prove what your Spectrum could do. It was colourful, silly and somehow, despite its simplicity, brilliantly entertaining. Horace Goes Skiing was created by William Tang, following the modest success of Hungry Horace. Tang built the game for the ZX Spectrum, with versions later appearing on the Commodore 64. The Spectrum's bright but limited palette defined its look. Simple sprites moving against vivid backgrounds. Tang's code was lean, using just a few kilobytes of memory, but he managed to squeeze in two distinct gameplay styles and a sense of humour that connected with players immediately. The game's cheeky mix of Frogger-style crossing the road and downhill skiing made it stand out from the usual shooters and platformers. Horace went on to star in several sequels, Horace and the Spiders and Horace to the Rescue, cementing him as an unlikely mascot for the early British micro scene. For many of us, he was just the first real character. In hindsight, Horace Goes Skiing captured exactly what made 1982 special. Creatively born from limitation and a whole generation discovering that you didn't need a flashy arcade cabinet to have a great time. Just a Spectrum, some patience and a very brave blue blob. As these countdowns progress, you'll quickly realise how much the ZX Spectrum changed the life of this 11-year-old kid. So, here's another. At number 4, it is Arcadia. When the ZX Spectrum arrived in 1982, it promised arcade power at home. Though most early games were simple, flickering affairs. Then came Arcadia from Imagine Software, and suddenly that promise didn't seem so far-fetched. Arcadia was a pure, unfiltered arcade shooter. No story, no fluff, just frantic, edge-of-your-seat action. Waves of alien ships swooped down from above, the colours flashing in a dazzling blur, and your job was simple: survive. It was like having Galaxian running on your Spectrum, fast, furious and full of life. What made it so striking was its speed. The Spectrum was still brand new, and most games moved to crawl, but Arcadia screamed. Its enemies darted across the screen in dizzying patterns, pushing the system harder than anyone thought possible at the time. It wasn't just a game, it was a statement. This was proof that that little black box could deliver the kind of excitement we'd only seen in arcades. For a lot of players, Arcadia was the first game that made the Spectrum feel powerful, modern and thrilling. Arcadia was developed by the newly formed Imagine Software. Founded in Liverpool by Mark Butler and David Lawson, the company would soon become one of the most famous and infamous names in early British gaming. Arcadia was their debut title, designed to show off what the Spectrum could really do. Written in Z80 assembly, it was blisteringly fast, so much so that it revealed a flaw. If your Spectrum was running even slightly faster or slower than expected, the gameplay speed changed dramatically. But in 1982, that speed felt revolutionary. The game's visuals were bright and bold, using Spectrum's full colour range to mimic the intensity of an arcade cabinet. Its crisp controls and rapid pacing made it a hit among early adopters, setting the stage for Imagine's later, more ambitious projects. Arcadia didn't just put Imagine Software on the map, it signalled the start of the UK's golden age of home computing. For many Spectrum owners, it was the first time their machine truly felt alive. A blur of colour, sound and impossible speed packed into less than 16 kilobytes of code. Right, this list isn't just full of Spectrum games. At my number 3 is an arcade classic, and it is Zaxxon. In 1982, the arcade world was obsessed with finding new ways to impress players, and Zaxxon absolutely nailed it. Developed by Sega, it was one of the first games to use isometric perspective, giving players the illusion of flying through a fully 3D world. Standing in front of that cabinet felt like peering into the future. The space fortress stretched out in angled, geometric beauty, and your ship didn't just move left and right, it soared up and down, dodging walls, lasers and missiles. That change in perspective was a revelation. It wasn't just about shooting enemies anymore, it was about judging height, distance and timing. The higher you flew, the easier it was to clear the walls, but harder to hit the targets. The game demanded skill, finesse and spatial awareness. The visuals were bold and futuristic, with bright blues and silvers gleaming against the black of space. Even the sound, that deep, synthetic hum of the engines, made it feel like a step beyond everything else in the arcade. For players in 1982, Zaxxon was a pure spectacle. It was one of those games that made jaws drop and coins clatter. You weren't just piloting a ship, you were entering a new dimension. Zaxxon was developed by Sega and released worldwide through Gremlin Industries. It was designed by Kazuo Kurosu and Ikugami Tsushinki, and its most important feature was that groundbreaking isometric projection, a first in arcade history. Using custom Z80 based hardware, Zaxxon rendered its world in a series of diagonal tiles, simulating depth and height in a way players had never experienced before. The inclusion of a shadow beneath the player's ship was a stroke of genius. It helped you judge your altitude, a small but critical detail that made the illusion work. The game was a commercial triumph for Sega and one of their first true global hits. It was also one of their earliest arcade games to be heavily marketed on television, complete with a flashy animation advert that cemented its futuristic image. Zaxxon inspired countless imitators and opened the door to the use of isometric graphics in games like Q*bert, Marble Madness and Night Law. It proved that arcades could deliver not just action, but immersion. In 1982, Zaxxon didn't just raise the bar, it tilted it on its axis. Right, the big top two in 1982. One ZX Spectrum and one arcade. But at number 2 is the classic Jetpack. By 1982, the ZX Spectrum had become the heart of a new revolution, the age of the bedroom coder. And one game more than any other captured that creative spark. It was Jetpack. Released by Ultimate Play the Game, Jetpack was fast, colourful and perfectly tuned. You played as an astronaut assembling a rocket, collecting its pieces and blasting off to another planet while fending off waves of alien creatures. The beauty of Jetpack was its simplicity. Everything happened on a single screen. No scrolling, no fuss, just sharp design and instant fun. The movement felt smooth and floaty, the controls tight and the action relentless. It was the kind of game that pulled you in for one quick go and kept you there for an hour. It looked and felt light years ahead of most Spectrum games at the time. The graphics were crisp, the explosions dazzling, and the sound effects punchy in that 8-bit classic way. More than anything, it felt professional. The kind of polish that made you realise British developers were catching up with the arcades. For a lot of players, Jetpack was the first game that made the Spectrum feel cool. It wasn't just about programming or tinkering anymore, it was about pure, fast, exhilarating play. Jetpack was created by brothers Tim Stamper and Chris Stamper, with programming by John Lathbury. Working out of a small office in Ashley de la Zouch, they founded Ultimate Play the Game, a company that would go on to define the golden age of Spectrum gaming. Jetpack was written in tight Z80 assembly, squeezing every ounce of power from that machine's 16K of memory. The game's colourful, multi-layered sprites and smooth motion were technical marvels for the time. It even featured a 2-player mode, a rarity for Spectrum titles in those days. Ultimate's minimalist packaging and mysterious reputation added to the magic. The company rarely spoke to the press, letting the games speak for themselves, and Jetpack spoke volumes. It won instant acclaim and became one of the Spectrum's defining titles, even earning the first ever Golden Joystick Award for Best Arcade-Style Game in 1983. The success of Jetpack paved the way for Ultimate's later masterpieces, like Attic Attack, Sabre Wolf and Nightlaw. But this was where it all began. One astronaut, one screen, and a rocket built with pure imagination. Jetpack wasn't just a hit, it was a declaration that the home computer revolution had arrived, and Britain was leading the charge. So we've got to my number one of 1982, and it is an absolute arcade classic that I still play to this day. It is of course Dig Dug. In 1982, the arcades were alive with colour and noise. Spaceships, aliens, racing cars, you name it. Then along came Dig Dug, a game that literally dug beneath it all and did something entirely different. Developed by Namco, Dig Dug was part puzzle, part action and part pure madness. You played a little miner armed with an air pump, tunnelling through layers of earth to defeat enemies lurking underground. Instead of shooting them, you inflated them until they popped, a mechanic that was as bizarre as it was brilliant. The visual style was simple but beautiful, bright colours stacked like layers of toffee, each one a new stage of soil. The enemies, a ghost-like pukas with goggles, and the fire-breathing Figars became instant classics, and the sound design was pure arcade magic. That rhythmic tune that only played while you moved made the whole game feel like a dance underground. What made Dig Dug so memorable was its mix of tension and humour. You dig a path, lure a monster into it, and then panic as another one came through the wall. It was funny 1 second and heart-pounding the next, the perfect balance of chaos and charm. For many of us in 1982, it was one of those games you could hear from across the arcade. That distinctive pop, telling you someone was having the time of their life below the surface. Dig Dug was designed by Shigechi Ishimura and Masahisa Ikegami at Namco, and released in Japan and North America through Atari. It ran on Namco's Galaga hardware, giving it the same colour depth and smooth animation that had made Galaga a hit the year before. The big innovation was the digging mechanic. Rather than scrolling or staying on a single plane, the player literally carved paths through the earth. creating the map as they played. This gave every round a fresh layout and a feeling of freedom rare for arcades at the time. The inflation pump attack was another stroke of inspiration, a whimsical yet strategic way to defeat enemies. Each pump of the arrows added to the tension, and the risk of getting caught mid-inflation kept players on edge. The result was a game that felt tactical, clever, and completely different from anything else on the floor. Dig Dug was a massive success, spawning sequels, merchandise and home ports on nearly every system of the decade, from Atari 2600s to the ZX Spectrum. It even appeared in arcades alongside Pac-Man and Galaga, proving that Namco had a knack for turning simple ideas into enduring legends. In the end, Dig Dug was about invention, a fresh perspective on arcade design that literally turned the genre inside out. In 1982, we'd never seen anything like it, and the truth to be told, we still haven't. And that was 1982, a year that changed everything. The arcade was still glowing bright, full of colour and chaos, but now the revolution had crept into our homes. For me, it was that first ZX Spectrum humming on my desk, cassette player chattering away as a screen filled with promise. Games weren't just something we played anymore, they were something we lived in. From the dizzying heights of Zaxxon and Dig Dug to the pixel-bright worlds of Jetpack and Horace Go Skiing, 1982 was where imagination met technology head-on, and the result was pure magic. If you enjoyed this look back at the year that arcade came home, don't forget to like, subscribe and share Nostalgia's Deep Dive with anyone who still remembers waiting for that tape to load or the sound of a coin hitting that slot. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep the pixels glowing, the tapes turning and the memories loading.